Welcome to another episode of Construction Genius. I'm Eric Anderton. Today we have a compelling conversation lined up with Jonathan Porter-Whistman, the CEO of PerceptionPredict.ai. We're diving deep into the fascinating world of data-driven hiring processes and how they intersect with human intuition. Have you ever wondered why your gut feel sometimes fails you when you're hiring? Or why certain qualities that you think are essential to job success may not actually correlate with performance? We unravel these mysteries and much more. Jonathan brings to the table some eye-opening examples from the real world, revealing how what we think we know might actually be hurting our businesses. In this episode, we also explore the unique dysfunctions of high-performing individuals, challenging conventional wisdom about what makes a good fit for your team. And so if you're interested in understanding how to make better hiring decisions backed by data while adding value to your organization's culture and bottom line, this episode's for you. All right, let's dive right in. Enjoy my conversation with Jonathan. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Jonathan, welcome to Construction Genius.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I'd like to just dive right in. What is the role of data in predicting how candidates that you're looking to hire will perform in your organization?
Yeah, data is extremely important when we're hiring individuals and they're doing a job for our company. There's a massive amount of data that activity generates. If you think in terms of production rates, cost of that employee, how long they stay in your organization. And computing power has finally gotten sophisticated enough and inexpensive enough that we can convert that data along with psychographic data about those people into making sure that we're hiring better people on the front end that are a good fit for our culture, but more importantly, can perform and will stick around for the long haul.
Okay. What do you mean by psychographic data?
Yeah, so there's this whole rich area of psychographic data. So most people think about tests like the DISC or Myers-Briggs, where they say introversion, extroversion. But it turns out that's really like 30-year-old data. And there are hundreds and hundreds of things coming out of academic psychology studies that we can measure about humans reliably. And we can do that with an online instrument. And so we really focus as a part of our company is taking that psychographic data and converting it into something that's useful.
Okay. Just to pursue that a little bit, I know there's tons of different assessments out there, and obviously the DISC and the Myers-Briggs, most people have heard of those. What assessments have you found that are actually useful and perhaps data-backed as well as insightful in terms of where a person's coming from?
Yeah, there's a host of assessments out there. Our company, PerceptionPredict.ai, really specializes in creating psychographic tests to help measure what is happening inside of a human being, the DNA, if you'd like. What's really different about our approach is when we talk to customers, we find they don't really care to know, does somebody have grit? Or do they have emotional intelligence? Or are they introverted or extroverted? The question they really want, and the reason they're using testing instrument, is they want to know, how will this person perform in my company? And so we're trying to get at, how do we leverage technology to convert psychographic data into actionable data? So just to give you an example of that, for one of our customers who does garage doors, and he does it on a large scale, he's about a $220 million company. He uses psychographic testing instruments. So just think of it as an online questionnaire, much like the DISC, but super powered. So his garage door technicians, before he hires them, they take a 15-minute online questionnaire, and we predict the average ticket size they're likely to write in the garage door, and also their customer satisfaction score, which is a blend of like callback rates, rework, Google reviews, those sort of things. And we're getting to within 15 and 20%. So you can imagine how that drastically reduces that expense of training somebody and then having them churn out of the organization.
When you say 15 to 20%, what does that number mean?
Well, it means if we predict somebody's going to have an $1,100 ticket average in the garage, once that guy comes out of training, he's going to be 15% above or below that line. And so they never really have to wonder, hey, is this working? Because we're tracking that.
Okay, so are you saying that for each company has a unique set of data that needs to be identified in order to be able to use it effectively in terms of hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. And we call that a performance fingerprint. And so really, we've started with large organizations. So you think companies like CrowdStrike that are a large global cybersecurity company, you have to have some amount of data from the people inside of your organizations. And then we can get into predicting things like dollar revenue, customer satisfaction score. We also, on the other side of it, realize there's a lot of SMB mid-market companies that maybe don't have hundreds of people doing the job. And so for those roles, we do what we call an industry fingerprint. So we have one for HVAC technicians, plumbing technicians. And in that case, we're really just predicting fit for the role and tenure. But the way we got to those industry models is we got hundreds of companies together of all sizes and actually assessed the people they had out in the field doing the work. We got actual performance, hard metric data back from those companies. And we use a machine learning algorithm to say, hey, of the 500 things you can measure for an HVAC technician, these are the 10 that actually matter.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And that model continues to learn.
So the larger companies, you can take a look at the folks that you already have in your organization, and that gives you a sufficient data set to be able to generate meaningful information. With a smaller company, then you do something a little more generic that is industry focused. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yep, you heard that exactly right.
Okay. So how large does my company need to be on a position basis? So let's say I'm looking to hire a foreman into my organization. How many foremen do I need to have out in the field that will give me enough data to make what you're describing here meaningful without having to go generic?
Yeah, so if we want to do something custom, you really start being able to customize that to an organization when they're at around 50 people doing a role. And as you get over 100 people, it gets even sharper. And then once we install a fingerprint in an organization, it's about a commitment to data. So as time goes by, and let's say they start and they only have 50 foremen, right, in those roles, as they churn through people and people naturally retire and move out, we get more data. And eventually that gets sharper and sharper, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say there are larger organizations. So let's say I know lots of large construction companies. Let's say you've got McCarthy. They've got tons of superintendents, Turner's, tons of superintendents or project managers. And I'm a construction company and I'm not a McCarthy or a Turner. But that data then, are you saying that data would then become available, and based on their data, that might be used in putting together my data for a superintendent or a project manager?
Yeah, we don't approach it that way. So we feel like the data from a large company is their intellectual property. It gives them the hiring edge. So in large companies, when we're ingesting and creating performance fingerprint, it is theirs. We use it for nothing else.
I see. Okay, great.
Where we're doing industry data, and I gave you the example of HVAC plumbing. We literally go out and find 100 HVAC plumbing companies that represent 1,000 technicians or more doing that. And they agree to share their data to help us build the model, and we anonymize it. And the agreement is they get to use the model, but we also get to sell that to smaller companies who maybe aren't quite to the point yet.
Okay. So how do you know the data you're collecting is correct?
Well, all data is messy. So there's a process, right, of cleansing that data, deciding what we're going to measure, how are we going to measure that. And that's true any sort of organization. But how we ultimately know is, I think we're the only talent intelligent platform on the planet that I'm aware that does this, is we post in our platform, here's the prediction we made about Eric, and here's where he is actually last time we measured him. And what we're really concerned about is what's the correlation between those two things, because we're basing decisions and informing our decisions based upon that. So that's how we know, is the underlying data correct, is because is the observable performance and the prediction we made also right? And if it's not, or there's a wide variable in there, our data scientists, our IO psychologists are digging in to say, okay, how can we improve that model? As an example, sometimes when you're international organization, your performance metrics for a particular role, even though it has the same job title, might be different region to region. It might have a different set of competitors, a different operating environment. So we're trying to normalize that with the client, and that that comes down to sitting down and discussing. So it's really not the easy button for a company to go this route, but it is once they commit to data and they commit to learning, they're going to see really drastic reductions. So we've seen companies that have 66% plus turnover and get that turnover rates down into the 11, 12% for particular roles. We've seen people reduce training time. And it's because on the front end, you're bringing in people who are naturally suited both to doing the job, but also fitting into your culture. And when I say culture, people think a lot of different things. But as an example, if you look at a dozen companies, and I know you consult with many companies, you have some that may have an inefficient training process, or they may have some sort of leadership dysfunction going on. And so what we're trying to do is say, how do we identify people that do well in your company today, the way it is today, not necessarily the company you're going to be 5 years from now when you've sort of developed your leadership and you've developed your training. And that's why it's never a static model. If we build a model for a company, it continues to adapt and change. So as an example, CrowdStrike is somebody we built an SDR, BDR sales model for. They're a large global cybersecurity company. And we found over a period of a couple of years when we went through COVID and their selling model changed and who they were selling to, over a 70% difference between that base model we started with and who and what they needed to be identifying for hires in the current time period we were looking at. And without data giving them that insight, you'll have many hiring managers still doing the exact same thing in terms of who am I looking for? What questions do I ask them? How do I onboard them into the organization? So we serve as sort of an early warning sign that the hiring environment and who you're looking for has changed.
It's very interesting. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Typically, when you're hiring someone, you're looking at their technical skills, and then you're looking at the cultural fit. How can you quantify cultural fit?
The way you quantify cultural fit, I think for most organization, is do they thrive in the environment that is your company? We can influence culture, right? Or we can set out as a leadership team to say, this is the culture we want. But it's really a fallacy. The culture develops itself, right? It is as a result of all the actions we take as leaders within our organization and how we talk and communicate our value system. So ultimately, for somebody to be a culture fit is, do they thrive in the environment that we're putting in? And is that repeatable? But secondly, we can take a sort of a notch down. I'll give you an example of a company that we worked with. In their hiring process, they said they looked for 4 things. They want somebody to be intelligent. They want them to be coachable. They want them to have character, and they want them to have experience.
Doesn't everybody?
That was sort of how they defined a great cultural fit for them.
Sure.
But here's the problem. When a hiring team says we're looking for somebody that has intelligence, that really means a lot of different things. And so if you look at the world of psychology and all the psychographics, it could be that a person that the team identifies as intelligent, it actually means they have good abstract reasoning, they have good cognitive ability. It could mean emotional intelligence. It could mean mental agility. It could mean future-oriented thinking. And so what we get at through our process of building a fingerprint is to say, when X company says they want to hire somebody with intelligence, this is what they actually mean. It means when somebody has emotional intelligence and mental agility, they fit well in our culture of intelligence. Right. And that's what we're doing is we're trying to take this broad label of what somebody is saying, somebody fits our culture, and identify what it is in the core DNA. When I say core DNA, and psychographics is really about measuring stable human attributes, things that don't change dramatically in a lifetime. So I think about if you were looking at a room full of kids, and none of them had ever picked up a musical instrument, but you could give them an assessment of some sort and say, this kid is going to play in Carnegie Hall. This person probably karaoke, and this kid should probably go play football, right? What we're really identifying is what's that core makeup that allows somebody with the right training and the right environment to thrive. And part of our analysis of an organization is saying, what's the potting soil? If you think of plants, like what's the soil you're going to surround that seed with that'll cause it to thrive? You maybe have an acidic culture, you maybe have a neutral culture, whatever it is. The end result, we have to find somebody that when we place them in that environment, they're able to do well and they're able to do their best work for you.
I get that. So basically what you're saying is your culture is like your soil. The employee is like a seed. The seed in the soil, what will it produce?
And you could put it in the exact same plant, repot it in different soil. All of a sudden it withers.
Yes.
Nothing bad with the soil, nothing bad with the plant. They're just not a good match.
Yes. So let me ask you this then. What questions should a company ask itself to separate between what they wish their culture was versus what it actually is?
You could unpack that in a lot of ways. I'm always a big advocate of talking to people in the lowest level of the organization as possible and in as authentic, it's going to sound like inauthentic, but I actually mean the opposite, in an authentic way. Let's have a real discussion with them. I'll give you an example. In my sales boss consulting, I go in and help organizations build out their sales teams, their sales structure. And when I first go into the organization, I ask the executive team, don't tell me what you think the problem is, right? Because if I come back to you and I agree with you, you'll think I just check marked exactly what you told me. And I always start at the very lowest point in the organization. Oftentimes, the gal or guy that's sitting at the front desk when I walk into the lobby, they're going to be an accurate reflection of how do people experience your culture, and then move up. The people that are most disconnected from the real culture are the people that are trying to set that culture.
Tell me more about because to me, isn't that kind of counterintuitive? Because you have, let's say when I'm thinking about my culture, I'm thinking, well, who are my A players that I really want to be here? And let's do a little survey of Sally and John and Fred and all of these guys. These are killer. I don't want them to walk out the door. This is what I want my culture to look like. Let's talk to them.
Good enough. And I think the real question for those is, what is it about your company that's causing them to thrive? It may not be the culture that you have.
Okay, explain that.
What I mean by that is in every organization, you have people at varying levels of ability. And somebody coming in may intrinsically just be a top performer. That might be in spite of your culture.
Yes.
Right? What you're really trying to do is if I'm driving A players and I have high turnover of A players in my organization, what I really need to find out is what's causing them to wilt and leave early. And that may have something to do with culture. It may have something to do with something else entirely. But by starting at the lowest level of the organization, the people that have the least to win and least to lose, you're going to get a more accurate reflection. And as you work your way through the organization, that image becomes sharper and sharper.
It would seem like you talk to someone at the front desk, right? What if they don't even think about culture? They're just in there just doing their thing and picking up their paycheck and off they go. I'm thinking about your top performers who aren't leaving your company. They're staying in your company. And I want to get more of those types of people, whether it's the technical aspect that they actually execute or not. But I want that type of person in my company.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are conversations that you should have with them. That's exactly what I'm suggesting when I'm saying, why do you stay? Why do you like working here? How can we do more of those things? What I'm suggesting is maybe we're talking just slightly looking at the same thing a different way.
Sure.
It's the level of authenticity that you're going to get in that response. When somebody's livelihood is completely dependent upon another person or a certain company or a certain job, or the level at which they're willing to be completely transparent changes. And the conversation that happens at a certain level in the organization amongst peers is a different filtered conversation when it's that level in an organization and a supervisor, and a different level of conversation between the supervisor and the founder of the company.
Yeah, let me be clear on what you're saying. What you're saying is that if you start lower down in the organization, because they have less to lose, they're going to be more authentic in their answer. Is that what you're saying?
Less to lose, but also people who hang around them tend to filter their conversations and their opinions less because they don't fear that person. So that person has heard the truth, and if they trust you, they can tell you it.
Okay. All right. So let's pursue that then. I understand where you're coming from there. What kinds of questions are you going to ask someone in that role that you're describing, perhaps lower down in the organization, to get some insights into the culture of the company as it actually is?
I think you just start with an authentic relationship with that person caring, and then you just ask them directly the same questions you would ask of a superstar. So you would present a problem your organization is facing and say, look, I know you don't directly control this. If you were in control and you had 100% decision making, what would you do? No holds barred. And a lot of times they're going to tell you an idea that actually makes sense because they don't have any skin in the game.
Why does that question help me to understand the culture of the company?
How would you define culture, Eric?
The way people behave.
And what causes people to behave a certain way?
Well, it depends. It's a combination of nature and nurture.
Yeah. And I would add to that it's also the way they think, which changes the way they feel, which changes the way they act. So I'm trying to understand when somebody enters into an organization or into a role or around a certain problem, what's causing them to think and feel a certain way? Because that's action that'll come out of that.
Okay, that's fair enough.
When I'm thinking about culture, I think of a culture of a company like a stage play put on by a psychologist. Like if you go to a Broadway play and you're the director, you can say, hey, I want the lights to come up this way. I want the sound to happen this way. And the set's going to go this way. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to lead that audience on a journey to get them to feel a certain emotion and to applaud and to, right? And we're doing the same thing with our employees. We're setting a stage for them wherein they get so involved in what's going there that they're feeling and acting a certain way. So every touch point, we're sending a signal about what's important, what's valued, what is our culture. And that's how I would generate culture, is that when you enter into a place, it has the ability to bring the best out in you and in a way that is acceptable to the organization.
Okay, can you give me an example of what you're talking about? Like, take that analogy of the stage play, which I think is interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. Give me a real world example of it. You don't have to name the company, but so that we can kind of hook into that, please.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. I started working for this organization. Two problems. I'll start with the more basic one. They just had high turnover when people were coming into their organization, and this happened to be in their business development role. And as part of my consulting with them, I decided I was just going to show up as a candidate. So I applied.
Did you tell them that?
No.
Good.
This is mystery shopping. They don't know who I am.
No, it's beautiful.
And I come in and I see the way the emails are. It's disconnected. It's disjointed. I mean, they might say they care about their employees. I have to fly out to Ohio for my interview. And so I fly out, I get to the airport, I go to the hotel. The hotel is the cheapest hotel in the town. It's all right. I'm not a high style guy, but I get up in the morning, I make my way over, and this is a multi-building campus and HR is all in one area. I go up to the front door. The window is dirty. The door is locked. It's 10 minutes after when I'm supposed to be there. It's the first appointment in the morning. Finally, two people come up, they're rustling around. Oh, I apologize. We got it pulled into an executive meeting. Sit in the lobby. I'll be ready in just a minute. I sit down in the lobby. The carpet has stains on it. The magazines are a year outdated on the desk. Like already I'm absorbing a lot, right? And then I spend all day in sort of HR land there with just trying to get through an interview. And I'm supposed to be there all day. It isn't until the end of the day I get to anything interesting. So I'm just going to use that as an example. We remade that process for them so that when somebody flies in, there's somebody at the airport picking them up. If it's late in the evening, they get them something to eat. They take them to a nicer hotel in town. When they get to their room, there's already company gear setting there for them. There's information about the company and the history of the company, right? Somebody picks them up in the morning, gets them there. And especially when they start their first day of work. So we fixed sort of the hiring process. But when we got to the first day of work, when they would start their first day of work, rather than starting in HR, they were building cabinets as the business they were in on a really large scale. They would take them into the factory and let them see the work that's being done and take them into the showroom and get them into the executive. And sort of the last thing they would bring them into. But also while they were doing that, they had done some research about who's left behind. Is it a wife or is the husband at home? Are there kids there? And that same morning, a gift basket would arrive with, hey, we know your spouse is out of town. Thanks for lending him to us for orientation this week. Here's some movies tickets and some fun.
So that's interesting, that whole idea of mystery shopping your hiring process.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you're an outside person. Is that something possible to do for a company with someone inside? I guess it'd have to be a certain scale or something like that, but you might want to just bring in someone from the outside like yourself to help with that, huh?
Yeah, I think it can happen both ways. The problem is when you bring somebody internal in to do it, even if you're a very large organization, they already have loyalties. They already have biases, and they know that what they share is going to impact somebody, and they will, even if they're not aware of it, they'll have an agenda.
Just that one thing alone, hiring a company to help you mystery shop your hiring process, that could really have a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely. And even more when you think about your point of contact with a customer. I've met with many CEOs and they have maybe a problem with their sales process or something. I'm saying, when's the last time you actually listened to what happens with face-to-face with your customers? They will listen to the video call recordings or they'll do a ride along. In many cases, it just makes them sick because they assume that the standard they had is being carried out. And the bigger a company gets, the harder it is for that culture to come from the top. It actually has to be baked into the structure. In my book, I talk about a company being, I'm going to switch from the stage play to being like a jazz club.
Sure.
And the reason I use a jazz club is I love jazz music. And when I was in Kansas City, from my office to my home, which was in a loft, I would go by the oldest jazz club in Kansas City. And when you're walking by, and I'd be home, even if I wasn't sort of in the mood and I wasn't planning on stopping that evening, all of a sudden I'd start hearing the beat and sort of a tempo, and it plugged into something good in me. I said, I'll just stop for 10 minutes, 15. I'll listen to one set. And then pretty soon I'm tapping my foot to the music. The bartender says, I would just have one drink. Okay, I'll have a drink. Pretty soon it's like 2:30 in the morning. Like, Jonathan, you got to go home.
Yeah, right.
I'm sucked into that. But what's interesting about the musicians, they play there all the time. They bring in visiting musicians. And a visiting musician can riff over the top of that music and, bring their talent and their energy. And at the end of that measure, land right in harmony with the rest of that home musicians.
Yeah, the house band.
Yeah, the reason they can do that is there's a structure, there's a beat. And that's how we have to be as a company, that we can draw people in to our organization, keeping their talent and their uniqueness and everything that makes humans beautiful. And they can bring that special talent, but they know how to land in beat with the rest of the organization. And more importantly, they get that they sound better and they do their best work when they do that. It's not forced on them. They actually want to hit it because it sounds better for the audience, the customer.
Hey, it's Eric. Hope you're enjoying my interview with Jonathan. Some people have asked me, Eric, where did you get that title for your book? Or the subtitle, Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS, Leadership, Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. Well, I got it from one of my customers. He attended one of my training classes, and when he was giving his feedback, he said it was effective, hands-on, practical, simple, and no BS. So if that's the type of person you are, and you'd like some advice on your sales, marketing, and leadership and strategy that is along those lines, this is the book for you. So what do? You go out to Amazon. You purchase 10 or more copies for you and your leadership team. You contact me directly, eric@constructiongenius.com. You say, Eric, I purchased 10 or more copies. And guess what I will do? I will schedule a 1-hour Zoom question and answers meeting with your leadership team to go over the book and answer any questions they have. And in addition to that, I will give you a free leadership training session within that 1-hour Q&A leadership training session time. In other words, you're going to get tremendous value if you just purchase 10 of these books. So that'll be, if you bought the paperbacks, they're $19.99. So for a couple $100, you'll get me for an hour. I would normally charge $2,500 for that time, and you will just need to invest $200 plus you'll get the book. If you read it as a leadership team, you will get insights that will tremendously benefit your business. So go out to Amazon, purchase the books right now, shoot me an email, Eric@ConstructionGenius. We'll get that Q&A session scheduled, and it will be all killer. No filler. All right, back to my conversation with Jonathan. Let's go back to this data-driven idea here. When does a data-driven approach fail to hiring?
When a data approach fails, it's typically because of a belief system that the hiring manager believes they've been at it for years, and their gut and intuition is they believe it's better than it actually is. As humans, we have this thing oftentimes called recency bias. But when they hire a superstar, they give themselves 100% of the credit. But when somebody churns out quickly, it's always forgotten. And it was something wrong with that candidate. So that's where you run into trouble with a data-driven process, is if you have people that are unwilling to recognize that their intuition might have led them astray. I'll give you an example. We did a project for a large retail organization. Think of like people selling cell phones and other things in a retail environment. They had a really highly defined hiring process built on their gut and intuition. They believed if they hired somebody and they had a good customer orientation and they loved technology, they would do great in that role. And yet they had a 50% turnover. Guess what the data showed us about their hiring process? Zero correlation between customer orientation and success in the job. It's not important to hire somebody who's going to treat your customer well, but as a filter for hiring, it wasn't doing you any good. Worse, we found that the people that self-reported a love for technology actually did worse in the job. There was a negative correlation. So on the surface, what seemed like a good hiring process based on the experience of a hiring manager and the people that were sitting around saying, what should we look for? They had really picked one, something that didn't matter at all, and two, something that was really actually hurting them. We did a large cleaning organization that had high turnover in the cleaning role, which is very high turnover. And we actually found one of the psychographics that was predictive of churn in the role was that the more sincere somebody was, the less time they lasted in the job. It's sort of counterintuitive. If you're the hiring manager, you're going to say, hey, Eric's really seems genuine, likable guy. I'd love to put him in front of my customer. But that quality of sincerity is actually predictive that Eric's probably going to churn out and not be happy in the role.
Why is that? Why was that in that situation?
That's always the million-dollar question is why? And while coming up with something that sounds right, makes it feel good, we've actually found it's not important why it's true. It's just important that it is true. But when we asked the hiring managers why it might be true, they said, now that I think about it, if somebody's really sincere, they have a hard time going in and dealing with a person that's in a bad mood. And these are people that were going into residential cleaning and putting on a false front and just smiling and dealing with it. That was their why. I don't know if it's true.
So that's interesting. What you just said there, the why isn't important, right? And that is kind of an interesting thing to think about because in business, we're looking for the what and the how. And if it works within the realm of acceptability in terms of performance and ethics, then the why behind it isn't that important. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yes. It's interesting, but not necessarily important. So we could boil that down to if you just take one psychographics like grit, which everybody's sort of a few years ago, grit was the hero trait. Everybody was measuring, does a person have grit? I don't really think a company cares if somebody has a grit. What they really care is when they show up, can you train them to the level of excellence you need them? And will they stick and stay and be happy in that role and add to the culture of our organization? That's really what people care.
That's interesting, right? Because I think sometimes when we talk about the culture of a business, we forget that it actually is a business. And a business fundamentally has a purpose, and that is to make money. And I know some people don't like that for whatever reason, which is kind of dumb because, that's why we're in business, right? We're in business to make money. And obviously we have to function within a realm of ethics and safety, et cetera, particularly in construction. But at the end of the day, you're there to make money.
Yeah, I write about this in my book. Oftentimes, if you have a really high-performing salesperson, they're just naturally gifted at it. A lot of times that person's sort of a prima donna. They're a pain in the ass.
They are.
They're hard to manage, and they don't want to follow all of the rules. And now there's a point at which that becomes caustic to the organization, and you have to get rid of them, right?
What is that point?
Well, I would say that when their presence on the team is pushing down the performance level of everyone else. But if having that prima donna salesperson on your team is only annoying to the manager that's managing them and the leader that's leading them, who cares?
Right.
But oftentimes an organization says, well, they're a pain to manage, so I'm going to hire a bunch of people that are just sort of milquetoast and will do everything I say. And I'm not letting the data suggest to me the same thing. If you have owners of businesses, and I'm sure you deal with them, senior leaders all of the time, is oftentimes their dysfunction is equal to their level of genius.
Yes.
Which meaning sometimes there's this whole area of their life that they're dysfunctional in, right? Or you read the biographies of people like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. There was an area of their life people said, oh, they were terrible in a meeting, or there was this dysfunctional area. You'll get people leading organizations that aren't data-driven, and they'll say, well, I don't want that in my organization, but we should actually be grateful for the dysfunctional piece if it gives us the genius piece.
Yes. So I think that's really good, right? Because you'll pick up a book at the store, a business book, and your typical business book is going to say, you've got to insist on these particular things, no compromise there, and if they don't fit, they're out. And then you're thinking, well, hold on a second, man. This operator that I have in my company, he just produces more than anyone else.
I've had sales leaders say, I want to fire this guy because he won't put things in the CRM system.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, let's look at the data. He's producing 80 to 100% more than everyone else. if you just do the initial sale, that's not all the referral business and everything that drives from today's activity by this guy. Why don't I hire him an executive assistant to follow him around and put everything in the CRM? Well, I can't do that. It would be unfair to everyone else. You're not running a data-driven business if you're allowing things like fairness. Like equal does not mean fair, and fair does not mean equal. And I think the larger an organization gets, by necessity, they put in processes and policies for safety and other things. Where we have to be careful is that we're not squeezing out the ingenuity and the things that make people uniquely gifted and talented to do that role. And that's where I think data helps us. We can start finding people like that.
So you're the leader of your company then. Let's say you're the president of your organization and you have a team of people, and Bob not only kicks ass, but he's a good dude. Dave kicks ass and he's a pain in the ass. What's the conversation I'm having with Bob to make sure that Bob isn't looking at me and saying, dude, you need to fix this or I'm gone?
I'll quote my grandfather, business would be easy if it wasn't for the people.
Yeah, right.
It's messy. So you just have to be willing to get in the thick of it.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean I'm never going to talk to the guy that's a pain, but I'm just going to realize I have to. And oftentimes you'll find people that are that way. You talk to them, you coach them, they sort of come back to a level of tolerance for a week, a few months, and they're just going to percolate back up. I'm willing to sort of accept that. And I'm willing to say to the person over here, look, that's his dysfunction. And we're going to continue to work on it, but it's not going to override the value he brings to the organization. And the moment it does, when that dysfunction trickles into something that's immoral, illegal, puts our company in jeopardy, harms other people, absolutely, they're gone. No amount of revenue production, no amount of performance is going to overweigh that. But I think we should tolerate more uniqueness in humans because that's what makes us great. And it's what differentiates us in the market.
Yeah, that's really interesting right there. That's a little bookmark for us to think through, because we're talking about something more complex than just these are our values, and if you don't fit in our little box here, you're not welcome here.
Yeah. And that's where, when people talk about culture, I think everybody puts a different label on what their thinking culture is. And to me, and it's just my definition, I think culture is how does the world experience our company and how does our employees experience our company? And that all boils down at the end of the day to what do they think? How does that make them feel? And what action does it make them to take as a result? In my book, I say people are giving you 100% of what they're capable of, or they have what they believe is a valid reason for not doing so. At some point, I'm capable of doing more as an employee, but I go, hey, nobody notices. They don't hold anybody else to standards. They don't pay me enough. Like insert excuse. It might be an excuse, but that belief to them is real.
Sure.
And I can get annoyed as a leader, or I could dig under the surface of that, go low in the organization and say, hey, if people are feeling like they're underappreciated and you had to fix that, why would you fix that? And they'll say, well, one of the reasons I hear all the time is they complain about X, Y, Z, and it would make me feel that way too. And you're like, oh, I never even noticed that.
Yeah. You use this think, feel, action framework. The order of that think, feel, action, is it ever feel, think, action?
I think if you look at the field of cognitive behavior therapy, that's sort of where this stems from, at least in my background, thinking about that.
Yep.
I think every feeling is the result of a thought and the importance we give to that thought. Now, we experience the feeling first, and then we experience the thoughts, additionally after it. But there is some thought that went into that. So I hear somebody's sharp tone and my thought, maybe even subconsciously, goes back to when my parents yelled at me and I got bullied in school. And all of a sudden I feel like, oh, they're trying to bully me. And they didn't have that intent at all.
Okay. So what you're saying then is that with the think aspect, it could be subconscious thinking as well as conscious thinking.
And almost always subconscious thinking first.
Okay.
Some sort of emotion, and then the visible thing that they're thinking that you're consciously aware of comes. I think the thing that gives you the most power to change individuals and even yourself is to identify what are the thoughts and beliefs you have that you don't even recognize as a belief. You just accept them as true. I'll give you an example. I believe the sky is blue. I have no reason to believe otherwise because every person I've ever come across has called it blue since the moment I was born. It doesn't occur to me that it could be red. right? And there are a lot of things in life that are that way. I grew up in what I would call a religious cult, and I had a lot of thoughts about society and about people that I wouldn't have even called a belief. People would say, oh, no, you're brainwashing. I'm like, oh, no, I have the cleanest brain. You're the one that's off target here, right? But when I got away from that and I was able to give some distance to it, all of a sudden I could see, oh, here's how I inherited that thought and that feeling, and that led to actions which reinforced my belief. And I'm sort of in this cycle of being trapped.
So is there a way to distinguish between a belief and what's actually true?
I think that's the human condition. You're never going to fix that. It really comes to a person's willingness to take it apart and look at it. One coaching tool that I found super helpful was something that is based upon a false belief. I'll just ask them, if what you're saying couldn't be true, what else might it be? And I'm not telling you it's not true. You could be 100% right. But if it just absolutely couldn't be true, what else might it be? And they'll give you that. And you say, okay, and what if it wasn't that? What if that couldn't be true? When you get down to about 4 levels, you're actually starting to and you're causing somebody that's stuck in a belief to open their mind that there are other possible options that they just haven't considered. Now the question is, why haven't we considered those other options? Because actually these 2 options over here are something you can do something about. There's something you have influence, and the one you've chosen as an excuse, you really have no control over.
Huh. What was that religious cult you were brought up in?
There are a lot of great people there, so I really make it a practice just to sort of leave that be and just take away the experiences I had from it, because I don't want to hurt those people who, for them, probably there's some people that are in there and it's the best thing ever for them in terms of a set of beliefs and friends, and just out of honor of those people.
I appreciate that. I'm curious because we hear this phrase religious cult in various sort of contexts. What do you mean by a cult? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so when I define particularly a religious cult, is when no freedom of thought is allowed without being kicked out of that group with very severe consequences.
Yes.
So as an example, when my son was born, I was still, and he's 25 now, I was still in the cult. And one of the things that they defined as the unforgivable sin, meaning God would never forgive you, is if you gave your son a blood transfusion.
Right.
Well, my son was born 4.5 months premature, and the option was to let him die or give him a blood transfusion. That's what science said. If I made the choice to give him blood, my entire family, social circle so that's what I call a cult, is where that environment is controlling human thought and the ability to take independent action.
Okay. It's interesting because that word cult is related to the word culture.
Yeah. The one thing I learned from going through that experience is understanding how people get from here to there. And in a cult, right, people have this need to belong. And how do people learn to belong? And I write about this in my book. There's like 5 things about how do people learn to belong: having a common language, having an insider language, having something to be against. All of those things go into how do you craft a culture. And it actually automates much of it. Like a great culture, you don't have to get up and say, hey, this is our culture, because the group starts reinforcing that thought of, hey, we don't do things like that around here. And because people have such a strong desire to identify and be involved, they'll subconsciously change themselves. Think about this example, because I don't think it's a bad thing. Most people say, hey, I have a standard I would never change. It's not true. If you go to a football game, baseball game, you go into a stadium and you go into the bathroom, like it's a mess, right? All those people drinking, and you wash your hands and you try not to touch anything, and you look at the trash can, you maybe try to shoot the towel. And if it doesn't hit and it lands, you don't pick it up, because that's what everybody's doing. If you go to a nice fancy restaurant and there's, maybe somebody standing there handing out mints and a towel, and you don't even think about shaking your hands, and you pick up the cloth towel and you wipe everything down nice. What's just happened isn't that you changed as a person, you fit in subconsciously. And that's what happens in our company. You come in, does your culture tell somebody subconsciously, hey, I might have been a superstar elsewhere, but I got to earn my place on the team here? Or does your culture say, hey, you don't have to work quite so hard to fit in around here. In fact, you better lower your standard a bit so you don't stick out like a sore thumb with the guys you're hanging out with at lunch and other places.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned something very interesting, this inside language. I understand what you're saying there. I'm assuming that inside language would be useful in a certain way to helping me to define my culture. So how can I get a better sense of what that inside language is? Because if I'm the president of my company, I'm probably speaking that language and not even knowing it.
Yeah. And what I mean by inside language, have you ever went into like a new industry?
Yeah.
Like you're in the construction industry, right? And so you know all the acronyms.
Sure.
And you show up to do consulting engagement and people go, oh, Eric belongs here because he knows our acronyms.
Yeah. It's huge.
That's what I mean by insider language. Not really helpful for customer facing, but imagine if let's take this to a company level. In my last company, every Friday we had an employee activity and we just labeled it Fractivity. And pretty soon it became a part of the culture. And without telling anybody, the marketing team started doing full-size movie posters for it. We started doing ad reels for it. And it sort of took on a life of its own. And it's because we labeled it a Fractivity. We just made up a name for it. The same thing with your people name their meeting some very plain title. Just make up something unique to your organization that represents that. When you title a conference room after a person or something, it's got a name, right? It's not like room B 103. When an outsider comes in, they go, hey, Eric, why is this the Judith whatever room? Oh, well, that's the founder, and they tell the story. And that's how you come in and feel like an insider, is because you know the company's stories, you know the ritual. When you go to a family event like Thanksgiving, most families that have a tradition around that, when you show up, you sort of know how it's going to go. You know what the food's going to be, you know who's going to get drunk, you know who's going to keep talking politics, but that's what makes it family. And you can be completely yourself in that environment because you know how it's going to go.
Right.
And that's really what you're trying to get as leaders defining a culture in an organization is, what's our insider language? What are our rhythms? What are our sacred things that we do? And when we do those consistently, we're saying, what do we value?
Okay. And what you're saying then is it's possible to quantify those or datafy those, whatever the phrase you want to use.
I love datafy. And I think, though, that also has to be a balance. You can't be a data head because we're human, right? The danger is when you're an extreme on either side of it.
How are you balancing that then? Because you're talking about using psychographics to generate data in order to make hiring more effective. How are you balancing in the hiring process the data versus the human side?
Primarily on the front end of the hiring process, if you have multiple candidates coming in, you have your candidate stream, I want to prioritize my efforts on the highest bet candidates because I only have so much time in my organization to take from my hiring executives, my directors of territories, whoever's making those decisions. So I want to make sure I'm putting best bet candidates in front of them. And then I'm wanting to let that person use their gut and intuition and everything else they would normally bring to the table to decide if that person's a fit. But what I'm wanting to do is I want to give you 5 or 6 choices that you couldn't make a mistake if you picked any of them.
Okay, excellent.
And that's the balance. And it's the same thing when I'm looking outside of the hiring process. If I'm data driven and looking at numbers, I have to also look at the people behind that. And I have had senior leaders in organizations that say, look, I know this person's performing at this level, and I've just decided I'm going to accept it because I'm human. They've spent their life with us. They have a love for the company. They would give us the shirt on the back. I know they're never going to be the 100, but I'm okay that they're 85.
Okay.
And I think that the famous thing of top grading, where you just like cut out the bottom performers every year, I don't think that's human. I think it's data. It does drive results, but it has the unintended example of saying perform at all costs, even if that decimates humans.
Okay. Interesting. So tell us a little bit more about your business and how people can get in touch with you, Jonathan.
Yeah, so our business is perceptionpredict.ai. I know that's a mouthful, but the people can get in touch with us there. They can get in touch with me at John, Jon, at the Sales Boss, and John at whohire.com as well. Whohire is just a platform that we enable some of those data tools in. I could give you the perceptionpredict.ai. You can put it in the show notes. People can click on it, but people misspell that more often than not.
Yeah, no, we will put all the links in the show notes to both the whohire.com and the perceptionpredict.ai. Excellent.
Usually for the kind of listeners that you have, it usually just starts with a conversation. Let's sit down and talk about what are the highest impact areas in an organization where performance or turnover, identifying the right people is a challenge. And let's do a pilot around that so you can see and experience the difference for yourself and your organization, what impact that has.
And so would that be by going out to perceptionpredict.ai and booking a demo?
Yeah, that would work perfect.
Okay, yeah. So on the homepage there, perceptionpredict.ai.
This is a great story around this, Eric. So I'm not responsible for all our formulas. I got involved as an equity partner 3 years ago in the organization. But the first was out speaking based on the sales boss, and I was working with clients, and that's how I got exposed to their product. It's a great story. It was started by a gal from Taiwan, literally grew up in a rice paddy, no running water, no electricity, first of her family to go to college. And she's a great thinker, a great data scientist, a great IO psychologist. And she just had this idea of, we've got these two rapidly evolving sets of data that people aren't using. So let's see if we can use them in unique ways. And she didn't have a lot of clients at the time, but she had reputable clients like Mercedes-Benz and CrowdStrike and others that you would recognize. So fortunately, I was able to get involved. We've moved the leadership team here to the US, but we're global as our employees and our company. And we started really systematizing how do we bring that in a very usable way to our clients.
Excellent. Well, Jonathan, I really appreciate you joining us. I found this conversation interesting, and I do wish you the best.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for listening to Construction Genius. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jonathan. You can go out to his website, perceptionpredict.ai, to learn more about his business. And the links are in the show notes. Quick request. If you like Construction Genius, and I'm assuming because you are listening right now, you do like Construction Genius, please go out to wherever you get your podcasts and give the show a rating or a review. That's really, really helpful because it helps us to get seen across the internets. And if we're seen across the internets, it really benefits the show in terms of it being spread, right? So right now I'm looking at our Apple Podcast preview, and as of September 2023, when I'm recording this, we have a 4.8 rating with 149 ratings. It'd be nice to get a couple hundred ratings up there. So go out to Apple if you do get your podcasts on Apple and give us a review. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. I'll catch you on the next episode.